What the hell? Let's do it.
That's the spirit. To quote the great Joseph Campbell, he said, "It is by going down into the abyss where we recover the treasures of life. Where you stumble, there lies your treasure." To the ironic twist of the unknown. Bottoms up.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Happy heresies and welcome to the desert of the real. Heresy shouldn't be this much fun, but it is. It just is, especially as you come to Aeon Byte to find out who you are truly at your depths and what reality is not. We don't take prisoners, but liberate them. We are not the final authority on anything, but hope to be an endless possibility for everything. You are the final authority, have always been, and you come here to find that gnosis to make up your own damn mind and take your own damn journey. My name is Miguel Connor, as always, your pompatus of gnosis and your madman across the waters of creation. Great to see everybody who is tuning in live. I see already people in the chat, as always. If you have any questions for our guests, please super chat them so we can get to them. And I always enjoy the very intelligent comments in the chat room. Everybody there is a lot smarter than I am, but my job is just to be Hermes, your psychopomp through the strange media and strange times that we live today in this age of Hermes, this Philip K. Dick world, and these Gnostic times. And I'm very excited to once again be joined by P.D. Newman. This time he is joining us to discuss his new book, Tripping the Trail of Ghosts, Psychedelics and the Afterlife Journey in Native American Mound Cultures. Danny, thank you very much for coming back on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure is all ours. And with us, too, it's always a pleasure to have Mr. Graham Pong. Graham, how are you doing on this Mars Day?
I'm doing very well. I guess I'm going to get to figure out if I have to build my mound before I get buried in it. Okay.
Not if you mess with the mob, then you'll find out very soon. So awesome. Yeah, it's for those who don't know, and I'm not doxing you, Danny, because it's in your bio. You live in Tupelo, Mississippi. You live in the home of America's shaman, as I call them, and haven't been able to go down there. I hope to go this year. Last year I did go, or it's actually a year and a half, I did go to Graceland, but instead we went to East Mississippi because we felt, my friends and I, that we should visit Robert Johnson and the Crossroads. You know, give our sacrifices to the Lord of the Crossroads and all those powers there. But I hope this time we'll take the other route and go to Tupelo.
Yeah. If you do, come see me. We were just in Graceland as well. We saw the Pompeii exhibit was there at the Graceland Museum. And just 2 days ago, I was down in the southern part of the state where Robert Johnson and Tommy Johnson, I don't know if you're familiar with Tommy Johnson.
No.
But a lot of the lore surrounding Robert Johnson with the Crossroads, some of that came in with a confusion with Tommy Johnson, who was actually a devotee of Papa Legba, Lord of the Crossroads. Robert Johnson inherited some of that from Tommy Johnson.
Oh, very interesting. Well, I'll have to check it out. Yeah, I do include Robert Johnson in my book, The Occult Elvis. Both died on the same day. Both, again, I make the case, were shamans of their time, just like in my new David Bowie book, First Draft. I call him a shaman, and I actually do tap into your book on theurgy, as I cited in the book. So
Very cool.
You and David Bowie are in the same book. And yeah, it's just interesting, especially all the magical stuff going down there. And it's interesting, too, because I talk about Elvis's traumatic birth, but one thing that I don't mention in podcasts, it's in the book, is how Tupelo had, when Elvis was one, I think 1936, had a tornado.
That's right.
Devastated the city, killed almost 250 people. The only reason it didn't kill 10 times more is because it was a Sunday and everybody was at church. Of course, they saw, this is the apocalypse. So, and it's still one of the top 5 most devastating tornado tragedies in our country. So your city knows about this. I'm sure it's still in their minds.
Oh yeah. There are big pictures through the libraries and kiosks where you can, you push a button and you'll hear people who lived through it telling the stories of what they saw and what happened. And yeah, it was truly devastating.
I bet. Something else. Well, awesome. Well, we'll be talking more or less in that region. Tell the audience the thesis of your new book and why did you decide to write it?
Sure. The thesis, what I'm doing in the book is looking at the Mississippian cultures, which both built mounds and maintained mounds that were left over from the preceding Hopewell cultures. And what really interested me was the afterlife model, the afterlife journey that they envisaged for the souls of certain people who knew this because it was a secret knowledge, but who knew this knowledge, which essentially constituted how to get the soul into the afterlife, into a place where we might call it something like heaven, even though I'm apprehensive to use a term like that in this case. But yeah, the way that they would transmit this information was through complex dramatized ritual in conjunction with the use of very potent psychedelic plants that would have the effect of inducing what we might call a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience, to give them firsthand encounter with this territory. And the ritual itself naturally served as a set and setting to kind of steer the effects of these plants, because that's really what set and setting is. It is academia's rediscovery of the efficacy of ritual. So that's the focus of the book. What got me interested in it was the similarity to their afterlife model to that of the Theurgists. I was the way it came about. I was in Yorkshire. I was speaking at a conference being put on by the Tyringham Initiative. One of the gentlemen there, Brian Murarescu, he's the author of The Immortality Key, has a background in classics, and theurgy was about to come out. So I'm telling him about the book and about how there was this idea that there were portals in the sky that the soul could go through, travel through the heavens, and get onto the Milky Way, which since the days of Pythagoras was seen as the space where souls, both prior to and after incarnation, orbited. And next to us were Dennis McKenna and Graham Hancock, and they were having their own conversation, but Graham overheard what I was saying, and he turned around and he said, "Oh, you're talking about the path of souls." And I said, "No, I'm talking about theurgy." And he said, "Well, I heard what you said, and every aspect of what you said applies to a T to the Native American concept of the path of souls." So immediately I thought, well, I have to learn about this. And I ordered a book called The Path of Souls that ended up being by a gentleman, Gregory Little, that lives in Memphis, roughly an hour from me. So when I got back from Yorkshire, the book was waiting for me. I read it, got in contact with Greg. We met up. He took me to some mound sites that I didn't know about. And from there, it was just I was on fire for it. And pretty soon, it became evident, especially by the time I was analyzing the botanical assemblages that were recovered from the sites, that psychedelics played a very important role in this afterlife model. And before I knew it, there was enough material for a book that I felt had enough new information to warrant it being published. Yeah.
Yeah, glad you made it happen. I think that's what strikes me is like you as the universality of it, because with the Mississippians, you saw theurgy, but of course I'm seeing the Gnostics, the same thing, make yourself die, take this flight, you meet the denizens, you cross the denizens, they were meeting animals, the Gnostics were meeting archons, which are animal-headed
That's right.
beings, and it's the same sort of universal shamanistic vibe of the afterlife. It's really striking that they all share that, and it's almost like, well, I always say you can always just write it off and go Jungian, like say, well, it's a collective unconscious, and then you just walk away from the discussion. But you wonder if there might have been some primordial civilization where this primordial shamanism, right?
Something, yeah. The Jung, I love Jung's work as much as anyone, but to use that to explain this material doesn't really explain it. It explains it away.
Yeah, exactly.
And it is really problematic in that, we've got Native Americans in and around the Mississippi Valley reporting something identical to what Egyptians and Greeks are reporting, and there's no known communication between them. So that really is problematic and does raise more questions than it does provide answers.
Yeah, the other way is you can also bring up Atlantis and write it off too. So there's always a way we don't have to get into an argument or do a lot of research, right? Or of course,
that's right.
UFOs, that's the third way we get out of this.
Yeah. Or like you said, legitimate primordial knowledge, or perhaps we're dealing with something that is truly objective.
Yeah, I would say so too. I do think that's I really do think how that's the spirit world works. And this really goes down to the concept of the shaman, the spiritual troubleshooter, the guy who has the internet connection to the other side and brings data back to help the tribe, heal the tribe, guide the tribe, get the tribe in a better way versus this very dark and vicious cosmos. So in
That's
Native
right.
American lore, that's the shaman is the same as the theurgist or the Gnostic hierophant. It's the same job, right? Except
That's right.
yeah, and it's the same. He's a rock star, right? Music, theatrics, gender bending, all that cool stuff is what the shaman does.
And all that's central to it. The music, inducing trance states. But you're right. It's about accessing, exploiting that axis mundi, and being able to travel into these other domains, whether it be vertical up or going down into the below world. But in the final analysis, the point being to bring back some piece of information that serves as a boon for the rest of the people. Just sharing their story, I think that's something that is kind of missed, is that just by mere fact of them taking this journey and coming back and telling it to the people introduces an element of faith and invigoration in the midst of a life that was, by all standards, difficult, hardships that we can't imagine, so for them to be able to bring back these stories, I do think that in itself is a form of medicine.
No, yeah, indeed. I mean, that harkens to the idea of who the shaman is, the wounded healer, the person that's broken down. And of course, MK Ultra, Stranger Things, it's this child that has to be traumatized and terrorized. And so it opens the channels of communication. And I was in another podcast with Dr. Sherilyn Jones. She's a Jungian, and she was telling me that even in some Western Native American lore, sometimes when the shaman is chosen, the shaman is like, F this is too much, and they will off themselves before taking the job. That's
That's
how
right.
hard it is to be a shaman, right?
That's true. And it's dangerous in other ways. You think about it's your job to heal these people. And if you don't heal them, you're unable to. Naturally, animosity is going to arise, suspicion about your ability to perform. And once the society has reached a certain level, an egalitarian level, well, you're the one who knows how to do things like witchcraft and cast spells, So when some tragedy befalls an important individual, all fingers point at you. So it really is a dangerous position to have.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I guess Socrates was right when he said philosophy is just preparing for death. And that's one of the big things. A shaman helps others go to the underworld or the afterlife, not when they die, but preparing themselves like the Egyptians and the Gnostics and and the mystery religions, this is what death looks like. This is the map of the cosmos and the star portals. And this is my job, is to train you like a pilot or something.
100%. Yeah. Right. Just like what you're doing. Yeah. You said, your job is like Hermes. They're psychopumps, a tour guide of the weird.
Yeah. And, but they also, as you say, in Mississippian culture, they're very similar to the mystery religions. To train you or get you into these rituals, they put you through hell, don't they?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And that also speaks to the sanctity of knowledge. It's easy for us to miss that. We live in an age of information where we can take it or leave it. We're bombarded with information, but possession of information does not, or access to information does not equal knowledge or wisdom. So in a world where wisdom is protected, we think Masonry is hardcore with their secrets and things. In this setting, this wisdom was absolutely sacred and secret and only passed on to the elite. And it's very similar to what we see in an ancient Egyptian culture, where initially it's only the pharaohs who were able to access this afterlife journey. They know the way, that they've been taught, received, and later on, it becomes their family and the noblemen, and finally anyone who could afford one could get a Book of the Dead. Mm-hmm. But in the beginning, it was just the elite that had this, and this is what we see with the Mississippians. They would form. Eventually, they would form ritual sodalities, secret societies of shamans, where they would impart this information, and the rest of the tribe, they might receive some of the myth, the lore, but not this. This stuff was explicitly reserved for a certain demographic of people. Now, by the time we get to the end of the Mississippian time, the period, in and around when Moundville emerges. Moundville is a mound complex in Alabama. Amazing place if you ever have the opportunity to visit. But what happened there was these sodalities got together, the members of these sodalities, and said, what if we offered this as a service to people who aren't privy to this knowledge. And so for a nominal fee, one of these shamans will step forward and guide, psychopomp wise, guide the free soul of a loved one, a family member, a friend, guide them on that path because they themselves don't know it. So later on, it became something that was accessible, just like with the Book of the Dead, to anyone who could afford it.
Yeah, and then again, that sounds very similar to the Gnostics and the Neoplatonists, because some have theorized, yeah, like you said, it was only the elite, but with the rise of the Roman Empire and the sort of disintegration of Egypt, as we knew it, you had all these high priests and wizards who had this knowledge, but they're also broke. So they're like, I got to start my own gig economy. And they started going to people in Alexandria, Hellenistic Jews, pagans, and hey, I've got all this information from the Egyptian mysteries, give me a little money. And so it went to the middle class or the working class. So it became available to all.
The miniaturization of the temples, we moved from entire temples to simply to altars that are miniatures of the temples, where almost like a board game, like chess, where each piece represents one of the priests who would normally have acted in a certain position in a ritual. Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's what we see happening later on. But early in the early days of the Mississippi culture, it's only chiefs and shamans that are doing this. And one way we know this is they're just like with theurgy, there are two portals in the sky. If you remember, Porphyry talks about two gates in the sky, one that's used by the gods, one that's used by the men. Well, the portal that is accessible near the Scorpio constellation, Scorpio, they didn't see a Scorpio. That's a Greek convention. They saw it as a feathered serpent, not to be confused with Quetzalcoatl, but it was a feathered serpent that they identified that constellation as. And it guarded that entry point so that if you didn't have licentia, as they say in a lot of the ATRs and ADRs now, if you didn't have licentia, he'd knock you down out of the sky and you'd fall into the below world, where you would remain with no opportunity to access the path of souls. And that is the portal that they were exploiting, say, in Cahokia in the early days of the Mississippians. But near the end of the Mississippian period, in Moundville especially, they're not accessing that portal. They're accessing the other portal, which is in the constellation of Orion. And of course, again, they didn't see it as Orion. They saw it as what they called the Chief's Hand constellation. And oftentimes in the iconography, you'll see a hand with what looks like an eye in the palm. Oh, wow. And that's the symbol, that eye. It's not really an eye. It's actually meant to be a cowrie shell. But that represents the portal that the soul has to launch itself into as an arrow upon death. Now, Orion is only visible in the night sky in and around the winter solstice. Mm-hmm. The same time that Scorpio never comes above the horizon in the night sky. So the serpent, he's out of the picture. He's descended into the underworld, where he sheds his feathers and he becomes what's known as the underwater panther. And he remains there in the below world all winter, like a bear in hibernation. But he comes back up after the winter solstice, after that time, and reassumes his position as the constellation of Scorpio. But in Moundville, they're accessing the other portal. The reason being they're taking people with them on this journey who do not have licentia, right? Who had the great serpent been in the sky, would have immediately stopped them, reprimanded them, probably reprimanded the shaman, and did away with the soul who was not initiated. So that's a good indication of this shift that took place.
Fascinating. And again, we go back to ancient Egypt and having to avoid Apophis in the sky, or I'm sure you read the Nessenes or the Ophites, the Gnostic sects, where there was Leviathan or some giant serpent that either could help you or destroy you if you messed around. Find out, F around, find out, kind of, as they say. So, yeah, I think it's so fascinating. And when you talk about Mississippian culture, it's not just down in the South. This was a much a bigger culture or tribe, or explain that.
We don't mean Mississippi in terms of the state Mississippi. Right. It's the Mississippi River. So it's tribes that occupied the regions in and around the lower Mississippi Valley. So this goes all the way up to the top of North America. But that's why they usually characterize it by saying the southeastern natives. And when we say southeast, we don't mean of the United States. We mean of the entire North American continent, Canada included. So northeast, southeast of the entire continent, which basically means the tribes to the, from the viewer's perspective, to the right of the Mississippi River and below Canada.
Right.
Even though some of them were in Canada, like the Ojibwa, which up there they called them Chippewa.
And were they politically connected or just sort of culturally nomadic? What was their society like?
It was different for each tribe. The Mississippians, it's an umbrella term that embraces a number of different tribes. And you'll often hear people say that the Mississippians just disappeared. No. That's not really true. What happened was when colonization happened, when the Spanish and the French came over, new rules started being implemented, new regulations that completely altered their way of life. For instance, the way a warrior obtained honor, valor was based on their practice of raiding. They would raid another tribe's land and take their belongings and their women, and for them, that the ability to do that is central to their way of life. And pretty early on, it was implemented. No, you can't do that. Now that we're here, you can't just go and take from someone. You stick to yourself, leave other people alone. And we think about that as that's obvious. You don't just go and take something from your neighbor. But
especially when they have gunpowder.
Yeah, that's right. but that perception is very egocentric.
Right.
We have to keep in mind that their way of life is built on this. There's a great quote from a chief. I forget his name, but he says, "We play war like we play baseball." And that there's two meanings we can take from that. Number one, war was central to what they were doing, but number two, it was like a game, and for them, games were sacred. There was no profane. The profane is a modern invention, right? For them, everything is sacred, and perhaps one of the most sacred practices for them was the game, the ball game, the Cherokee ball game. And other tribes, it was called chunky and involved a round wheel-like stone. But this game was wrapped up with their entire mythos. It involved the entire cosmos. It held such weight that who won and who lost and how the game was played affected them on every level. So for him to say we do this like you play baseball, he's also saying it's incredibly sacred to us to be able to do this.
Very much, yeah. And again, this harkens to the Hindus and Krishna and Arjuna. The universe is just a game you play, but you cannot win. So sorry, Arjuna, but this moment of pausing because you don't want to go to war, and Krishna's like,
Right.
that's just the way it is.
Yeah. He says, I respect that you have come to this realization that you want peace, but guess what? You're here to kill your cousins.
Yeah, that's your sacred duty.
Yeah, I love that. The irony.
Yeah, it is. Like I see my cat in the yard, and this other big tomcat comes by. My cat isn't going to go, oh, I don't like violence. It's like I either fight or I lose my territory and my food and my owners. So,
That's right.
it's just the way the universe is. I wish it was different, but bitching about is what the Gnostics do. So let's talk about the mounds. Obviously, there's a lot of them. There's one here in northern Illinois where I live, about an hour away. Graham is original from Ohio. Obviously, mounds are there.
Sure.
What are the mounds for those who might not know, and what was their purpose, Danny?
So the mounds are a lot like the primordial hill in ancient Egypt. It's the first emergence of life. Many of the tribes saw themselves as emerging from these mounds. They're kind of like a womb in that sense. And they also become an axis mundi, a sacred mountain anchoring the ground to the sky, to the heavens. And when we're talking about mound complexes, they're also something like a sacred calendar, because you can stand on one mound and look in the direction of other mounds. And when the sunrise or sunset aligns with them, which happens in and around the solstices and the equinoxes, or when it aligns with the moonrise, the greater or lesser moonrises, because they also recognized this very long 18.6 year lunar cycle. It tells them where they are in the cycle of activities, whether it's time to plant, harvest, whether it's time to make this sacrifice, have this ceremony. So it also becomes a giant calendar. And the way they look, they can look a number of different ways. The oldest mounds are heap style mounds. They just look like a big hill. And this is true of the oldest mounds in the United States, which are located in Louisiana on the LSU campus. And those mounds were recently determined to be older than Göbekli Tepe. Let that sink in. Older than Göbekli Tepe. But as the earlier cultures, the Poverty Point cultures, slowly gave way to the Hopewell. The Hopewell also built their own mounds. And again, the Mississippians inherited those and they built their own mounds. Some of them, like the ones that are around here, a good example is Owl Creek Mound, which is roughly 40 minutes from me, south on the Natchez Trace Parkway. And it looks like a pyramid. It's a flat top pyramid, a trapezoid, and a lot of people don't expect that. They don't realize that we have pyramids here in Mississippi, right? But they're not made out of stone, but for all practical purposes, they are pyramids. And on these flat tops were often built what are called charnel houses. And these charnel houses were small wooden structures built to hold the bones of the dead. And the reason the bones of the dead are kept especially near the end of the period, is because, remember, the Path of Souls ritual to get the souls onto the Path of Souls can only be done in and around the winter solstice. So if they die in the spring, what do? We preserve the bones in a bundle, and they're kept in these houses. And then when the time comes, they're pulled out. The ritual is done to get them onto the Path of Souls, and then they're properly disposed of. In some instances, they were cremated, in others, they're buried. Now, when these mounds are built, oftentimes at the very base of them are the remains of natives. One of the most fascinating things about them is, in many cases, there are giant skeletons at the bottom. They can be anywhere between 7 and 9 feet tall. And something fascinating and curious about that is when you read the literature from those that are excavating these mounds and finding these skeletons, they're very clear about the heights and saying, even using the word giant. Yes, there's a giant skeleton. Now, that literature is still published by the Smithsonian today, but all of those references are wiped clean. If it's a giant skeleton, the reference is taken out. And they still have those skeletons at the Smithsonian, but they're under lock and key. And by law, no one can view them, and it makes you wonder why. Is it because of a fear of, the public thinking, oh, this is antediluvian giants or
Nephilim?
Why exactly? I think they're trying to guard it from conspiracy, but what they're really doing is fueling the fire.
Yeah.
But there also will be the remains of individuals that are placed seated upright, in a circle with their backs to one another, forming a circle, sometimes with their feet touching to form a circle, in cross formations. In one instance, there was an individual that was buried face down that had a second individual sewn to his back to make kind of a conjoined twin kind of effect.
Wow.
And this was probably done as a reference to the hero twins. The hero twins are supernatural thunder and lightning beings that are probably the most common mythological motif in all of the Americas. It shows up in South America, Central America, North America. Paul Radin called it the central myth of the Americas, but it was probably in reference to that was done. And so once what are called sudatoria, sweat lodges, once sweat lodges became a thing, they started adding on mounds, embellishing the mounds in what I call a sidecar fashion. So you'll have a round mound attached to this already trapezoid shaped mound. And on top of those, they would place sweat lodges, which became very important in the ritual lives of the natives at that time. So sometimes you'll see, the trapezoid style mound with this odd round platform mound attached right to it. And even, you recently published a fantastic book on Elvis and his esoteric proclivities. The house where he was born, it's about a 10-minute drive from me. I'm in West Tupelo. It's in East Tupelo. But with a 5-minute walk from Elvis's birthplace, there's a mound with a marker, that indicates its position. Over the years, it's weathered down, because in the early days, a lot of people didn't realize what they were, and they would plow them down for planting, and but there is a small bit of this mound left, It's so close to Elvis's birthplace that it's beyond question that he set foot on it.
Oh yeah,
Probably,
he played
probably
it and
more
played
than
on it as a kid,
That's right.
and who knows what powers he might have tapped into. That's all it would have taken. So
That's right.
wow, that is fascinating. Yeah, and the idea about the giants is also incredible. There's, the old saying about never believe anything until the government has officially denied it. Scholars do that too. Like you said, it's like, just show us the evidence. But yeah, they're hiding something. And I've always resisted the idea of giants. I always thought it was just a term. But the more evidence I see, the more I realize, other races, different races were there, and the natives knew about them.
Yeah. Their stories still exist. They talk about a race of hairy giants, which we might call Bigfoot. Basically that were cannibalistic, and at one point they didn't live in peace, but they did live in range of one another. And different tribes have different stories about how they eradicated them. In one case, they chased them onto a raft. They floated out in the middle of the water, and the natives surrounded the edge of the water and kept them from coming back, and they just starved to death out there. In another, they chased them into a cave and filled in the opening with wood and set it on fire and choked them to death. But there are stories about other races that even natives today. I'm good friends with a number of different natives from a number of different tribes, both in lodge and outside of lodge, and they don't question this. They don't talk about it like these are stories. This is history for them,
Yeah, I think that is truly fascinating stuff. Sometimes I write it off. Oh, it's just Nordic space Nazis. Sometimes it's like it's always fun to Jung space Nazis instead of just looking at the truth. But that's a human mind. Well, I want to bring in Graham. Graham, do you have a question or remark? What do you think so far?
No, I was going to say I've been enjoying it. Trying to figure out just how to integrate that with my existing knowledge, because I learned it as the Adena to the Hopewell to the Fort Ancient cultures. As far that was the Ohio sequence, and it's like the Adena came in, and that their graves were similar. Their mounds were similar to like the tumulus culture. They were like grave mounds, just giant mounds. And it was the Hopewell that brought in the astronomical orientations and all.
Right. That's right. You get a lot of that from William F. Romaine. He's published 2 or 3 books on the astrological significance of the Hopewell building, particularly around Ohio. And he was the one who drew the connection between the serpent mound to this great serpent being that was represented by the constellation that we recognize as Scorpio.
Yeah, and you're what you were talking about during the Mississippian culture, it being an elite that had that sort of spiritual technology. It seems like that's something the Hopewell brought in, because they went from like about 200 BC to 500 AD, and they didn't overlap with the Mississippian. They were more like a few hundred years later when they arose.
That's right, about 500 years.
And it seems almost like a hidden secret elite tradition from the Hopewell is what was the path of souls for the Mississippians. Just speculating, trying to connect what your research to my knowledge.
Yeah, and I agree. There's no doubt in my mind that the Hopewell were possessed of this same afterlife model. Now, granted, there were probably some peculiarities to both of them, and naturally it evolves over time. But when we look at the iconography that we know is related to the Hopewell, the hand is a good example. You see the hand represented a lot. Now, By the time we get to the Mississippians, that hand is always associated with that constellation. Whether that was true for the Hopewell, it's more difficult to know. But William Romaine, he absolutely thinks this was the case, that they were very aware of this same knowledge. And remember, with the Mississippians, we go from exploiting the portal in and around Scorpio to using the one in and around Orion. Well, with the Mounds in Ohio, they put all that emphasis on that serpent mound. We don't see a hand mound, for example. And I think that could possibly speak to the exclusivity of that gate, that portal located in and around Scorpio, as being the earliest known model. That this turning to the hand constellation, to the opening on that side, is something that came about out of necessity, following the development of extending these benefits to those who had not been initiated into it.
Fascinating indeed. Yeah. And going back to the idea of the twins, of course, I thought of what Castor and Pollux, and some say Peter and Andrew in the Bible. Again, these storm twins. I wonder, God, I'd love to know the primordial myth. I have this strange, I don't know, conspiracy mythology that 99% or 90% of solar systems have a twin sun. Somehow we think we don't. And I think if we looked, I think there might be a twin sun, and that I think not knowing this is affecting our myths and the idea of always a twin and a dying twin and all that. Anyway, I'm speculating too, Danny.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
I'm sure the ancients probably knew of a twin sun, which is scientifically a solid theory. But
yeah. And you having a background in Gnosticism, I'm sure you encountered the teachings of all of us having a twin in heaven, a second
divine twin.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like Mani and Jesus and all that. I guess the ancients probably called it the daemon. It's always with us. So it's the universality is amazing, and it just shows me there is a truth. There is a primordial religion that you would agree we could all tap into for the betterment of the world. And as we're discussing, there are those that want to hide this shit, right?
Yeah.
They don't want us to know ourselves and know the spirit world and heal with herbs and all that stuff. It's same old story, Danny.
And with the Mississippians, we also see that twin motif come in with their conception of the soul. They believe in two souls, twin souls. Mm-hmm. One is called the free soul, and that's the soul that's able to leave the body and travel. The other soul is earthbound. It doesn't go anywhere. It stays here. And you see something identical with the Egyptians. I'm always going back to the Egyptians because the cultures are so similar, but they've got, that's right, the Ba and the Ka. And the Ba is able to fly on, it's a bird with the face of the deceased, but the Ka remains behind and kind of serves as the connection for its children and grandchildren. It serves as kind of the luck for them, the good fortune here on earth. The way I first thought about that is, the free soul being more akin to what we recognize as the suke, the soul itself that can leave the body, that's free. But the second soul that's bound here, more akin to our genetics, right? Our DNA. It's easy to see how both of those qualify as you, as the individual, but both are clearly separate and serve separate purposes.
Yeah, very true. And yeah, I'd like to move on to the idea of entheogens because again, we go to the same topic of what's allowed and what's not allowed. I'm saying this because I did a show on Shintoism last weekend. And of course, even in Shintoism, there's a controversial argument whether these Japanese shamans did cannabis or other entheogens. And of course, it's split. You always have, they did not need that for altered states. And then the other side, we have the evidence and we should bring it back to Japanese culture. So, and you see this all over, right? All these
That's
cultures
right.
is a big debate. Did they use entheogens or not? And again, I think gatekeepers want to keep this stuff away from us. But tell us, how did the Mississippians use psychedelics, the black drink, and all that?
Uh, so the black drink is something that was very widespread. It's created from the yaupon holly, Ilex vomitoria, which is the only native source of caffeine in North America. Now, when the Spanish first came in, they would observe them drinking. They would drink it out of these giant whelk shell cups. They would observe them drinking it and vomiting and drinking it again. And so it earned the name Ilex vomitoria because they believed it was an emetic. Well, these plants grow all around here. So I immediately thought, well, I'm going to give it a shot, and see what this stuff does. Because I had known that before coffee began being imported here, the colonists were waking up and drinking a tea made from this same plant to get their morning jolt, to get going. But they're not vomiting, so what's the deal? So I started boiling it up and drinking it and drinking more of it and making it more and more concentrated. And while I would definitely get, the caffeine jitters, I never once got nauseated, never vomited. And so it made me start to wonder, could other plants be being added to it? And the more I studied, I find out that that's absolutely the case, that the black drink is a base, and what's added to it changes with the context in which it's being drunk. Now, sometimes they were adding datura to it, which is a very powerful hallucinogen. You might call it a deliriant. But for instance, when they went to Spiro in Oklahoma, they found thousands of these cups and tested the residues and found that a huge percentage of them, in addition to the Ilex vomitoria, contained residues of datura in them. So they were certainly using datura for some of the rituals. Now, but that still doesn't necessarily make you vomit. And my research in psychedelics, it immediately made me think of ayahuasca, which is a tea drunk in South America that almost always induces vomiting, or sometimes it can be the other end. But in either case, it causes purging, so much that it's called la purga in some regions. So I was immediately interested because when I had studied the botanical assemblages found from these sites, many of them contained plants that were known carriers for the very same compounds that are found in ayahuasca, N,N-DMT, and beta-carbolines, monoamine oxidase inhibitors like harmine, harmaline, things like that. And so I started digging through the ethnographies to find out, could it be possible that they were adding any of these plants to the black drink? And I very quickly found very strong evidence that they were, particularly among the Cherokee. The Cherokee revere a specific tree here called the honey locust. It's classified as Gleditsia triacanthos, but it used to be called Acacia americana. And acacia happens to be the source of DMT and certain traditions of alchemy. So I really started digging into their relationship with this tree. The first thing that grabbed me was that for their ball game, they cut the sticks from these trees, but only if they've been struck by lightning, because they're specifically associated with the lightning hero twin. And while they're playing the game, they take the roots, and the roots is where the DMT is contained. They take the roots and chew on them and spit the juice out and rub it all over their bodies. And DMT is absorbable transdermally. So that alone indicates that they were exploiting it for entheogenic purposes. But finally, I found this myth called the gambler myth. It was preserved by a man named James Mooney. And in it, he lists three trials and a rite of passage for that most likely served as what's called a charter for very real rituals that young men were put through, probably in a rite of passage into manhood. All three of the trials involved this honey locust, all the way up to the last trial, which he has a pot boiling, just like when they boil the black drink, but he's boiling the roots of the honey locust in this tree. And he has the boy climb into the pot. And there are actually gorgets, shells that are carved with an image that archaeologists have been unable to figure out what it is, because it's a circle with one of the hero twins in the center, and he's surrounded by these squiggly lines that they say look like spaghetti. So they actually call it spaghetti style gorgets. But it was pretty obvious to me that this is that pot with the boy, and those are the roots boiling around him. And so I thought, okay, they're boiling the roots, they're boiling the DMT. Where is their source of a monoamine oxidase inhibitor that would make that DMT orally active, as in the case of ayahuasca? Well, it just so turns out that they had three choices that they could choose from, that all three of which showed up in the botanical assemblages. Number one, they had passion flower, which is very common at the mound sites. Passiflora incarnata. It contains harmine, enough to activate DMT in an ayahuasca-like beverage. They also have the black drink itself. The Ilex vomitoria contains small amounts of beta-carbolines, just like its cousin in South America, yerba mate. In fact, there are American patents that use these plants specifically for their beta-carboline content for a medication to help people stop smoking. And then the third being the tobacco they were using, which was Nicotiana rustica. Nicotiana rustica is roughly 3 to 9 times as potent as commercial tobacco, and it also contains beta-carbolines, contains MAOI inhibitors. So the possibility that they were using these in conjunction for entheogenic shamanic purposes are very strong. And this is what I call my Misihuasca hypothesis. You know, that's a tentative term for it because we don't have a better name for it. And there's no one left alive now, or at least that's talking, that remembers using anything like this. But the chances are strong. I presented this research to the Society of American Archaeologists, to a conference of theirs in New Orleans, and it was very well received. A number of them approached me and said, you know, this is spot on. I think you're exactly right. So it's very promising, but again, it is still just a theory. You know? But we know for certain they were using very potent tobacco. They were using datura, and they were using black nightshade. So a number of plants that all of which on their own were capable of inducing what we might call near death or out of body experiences.
No, it makes sense. Yeah, great content. Yes, and I've done ayahuasca probably 20, 30 times. I think I've only thrown up twice only. So, of course, yeah, like you said, afterwards, yeah, you're on the pot a lot. But such is the shamanistic journey, the things you do for love of the divine.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, and as we get to the end, yeah, for the audience, if you have any super chats, this is the time before we shut down this this spiritual adventure. But quickly, could you give me the Mississippian cosmogony or their creation myth?
Well,
Is there a single one, or are we looking
no,
at different
that's
ones?
what I was going to say. It would change with the group, how
Okay.
things came about. What's more common is to see the maps of what it looks like, and it's the very familiar three-tiered world connected by a central tree, with the roots in the below world, the trunk in the middle world, and the branches in the heavens. But the way the world came about, I can think of three different, very different ways that it was believed the world came about. And one of them, there is a husband and a wife, and she's pregnant, and she has strange cravings, as pregnant women sometimes do.
Mhm.
And she wants to chew on the roots of the honey locust tree. That's what she wants. And so her husband goes, and he's already gone all around the world to get her all these different things she's craving, and he's absolutely sick of it. Finally, he gets her the root, and in the story it says that we don't know if she fell or if he pushed her. But in any case, she fell into the below world, and somehow her contact with that below world brought about the kind of like a Sophia.
Yeah, very much. Or Kai Bell fell from heaven in some ways.
That's
You're right.
yeah, very similar to that kind of a thing. So there are a number of them, and it changes with the tribe.
Right. Yeah, as normal it is. So, yeah, it's awesome. Well, as we are at the end, do you have any last questions or comment, Graham, for Danny?
Just to say thank you. No, you filled in a whole lot of information I've never heard before. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Graham.
Yeah, and we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much in this book, and it's always useful, very rewarding, and fascinating. Always enjoy the work you do. What are you working on next? I don't know if you want to talk about your documentary. Is that still top secret, or?
Well, it's not top secret now, is it, Miguel?
Yeah, he's working on this is the JFK assassination documentary. You will. He uncovers everything. That's the one he's working on.
It's not secret at all. We're working on a documentary that's looking at my previous research into the role of acacia in alchemy, beginning with Zalsamos of Panopolis, and how that traced its way into the Hartlib Circle, Dee and Kelly's activities, finally into the Royal Society, which is how it found its way into the early days of Masonry, and wraps up in and around the Fulcanelli affair. And we should be done with that hopefully this winter. Once I get that out of the way, I've got 3 books that I've started that I'm working on. One of them is on Plato's. What it is Iamblichus had a way of organizing and reading the Platonic dialogues so that they served as an initiatory structure, baby stepping the reader out from pessimistic dualism into radical monism.
Right.
So I'm working on a book on that. I'm working on a book on tarot. And the third book is on Picture Cave, which is the kind of the womb from which the Mississippian culture was born. It's a cave that's located in an undisclosed location that I was blessed enough, lucky enough to get to access. And the iconography on the walls, there's a book about Picture Cave and about its history, but this book is about the story that the cave itself is telling, the iconography on the wall. So I'm letting the cave speak, and that should be out probably summer next year.
Good deal. Good deal. Well, we look forward to everything and everything you do. Thanks for that. But we are at the end. I guess first I will say, Graham, thanks for keeping us company as always, sir.
And as always, it was my pleasure. Looking forward to next time.
Indeed,
Thank you, Graham.
Yeah, and Danny, as always, thanks a lot for everything you do. And this was a fascinating chat.
My pleasure. Always a pleasure, Miguel.
Always. And yes, the book link is Inner Traditions link are in the show notes. Check it out, whether you're watching on YouTube or one of the podcast platforms. So definitely get the book. You won't be sorry. For the audience, thanks for being here. As always, please support this heresy. Like, subscribe, donate, become a sub. Let's keep this alternative media going, because they are hiding things, and there's so much wonderful discoveries and treasure that will really help the collective consciousness of humanity. But off my soapbox, thanks everybody for being here, and we shall talk soon. And as I always say, write your own gospel, live your own myth. Take care, everybody.